Hello YouTube, this is a video I put together to best explain diesel emissions and how that links to the recent Volkswagen scandal. Now for me to best explain the whole diesel emissions and the general subject matter, I found it best to divide it into 4 different sections of what we're going to cover in this video. The first one is just general discussion of the diesel engine and how it works, and I'll do some comparison to a normal gasoline engine and give the benefits and show the differences in a model on how they're different than each other. Next, I'll show you what kind of control devices we have created nowadays to help control emissions coming out of the tailpipes. We'll move on to the Volkswagen scandal, where we'll go into exactly what's going on, and with the knowledge you've learned from the previous 2 sections, I'll hope that if you hadn't already understand the Volkswagen scandal, that I'll be able to help you better understand what's going on. And we'll end with some final thoughts and my opinion about the whole situation.
Okay, so the first thing we need to understand is the whole general idea of internal combustion and whatnot. I have a gasoline engine here, which is different than a diesel, and I'll explain those in a second. But we're going to start with the gasoline engine so you can understand sort of the physics, I guess, behind of how an internal combustion engine works. Specifically a gas, so we can compare it back to the diesel. Okay, so what you're seeing on your screen right now is you have that yellow stuff coming into the cylinder is your air-fuel mixture. I think they got a little fuel representation over here with that pink box, maybe injecting some fuel into this air. But on this would be a carbureted or injected through the air intake engine instead of versus directly into the cylinder. And the key difference here with the gasoline engine versus the diesel is in your gasoline engine, it's ignited by a spark, and that's what your spark plugs are for. So the spark will explode that fuel in the compression stage there, and that explosion will force it down. And that's the simplest way to understand on how it creates power. And that the compression within that engine is it's a lot of pressure, but it's significantly less than what a diesel would be. Now with your gasoline engine, you're talking about 100 to 200 psi of compression. That's the pressure within that little entrapped area that the engine is forcing up. That's how tight the inside of the engine is, and that's good enough to allow for a good seal and explosion to when the fuel is ignited going down. And that's all you need for a spark combustion engine or spark ignited internal combustion engine. Pretty much the fuel air ratio comes in, is dragged in, then it's gone up and compressed. The spark plug ignites with a little spark, blowing up that air and fuel mixture and forcing the piston back down. And then the exhaust valve opens back up, and the exhaust goes out. Exhaust gases go out the exhaust port or exhaust valve, whatever you want to refer to that, and out into the air. But the key thing to pay attention to here is that this engine has a spark plug, and the second thing is the pressure within the cylinder. We're only talking 100 to 200, like I stated earlier, and you'll see why that's important once we get to a diesel engine. Okay, the next example I threw up here is the diesel engine itself. Now, because of a whole bunch of copyright issues and that kind of stuff, this is going to be the most in-depth diagram, I guess, of a diesel engine running that I could get. But there is some slight variances into this. This is not fully true, but I think you'll get the picture once I start explaining. So diesel engines are commonly known more as it's sort of forced combustion engine, or it works by using its compression to ignite the combustion, I guess I should say. It has similar features to a gas engine, while the ways the fundamental ideas of it, the piston, crank rod, that kind of stuff. But a diesel doesn't have spark plugs. The air comes into the engine just like a gas engine through a valve. It gets pulled in by the piston lowering down, and then the piston goes up, similar to a gas engine. And what makes this different is the pressure within that is significantly more than a gas engine. We're talking about 350 psi or more, and that is a lot of pressure in a cylinder. And as it reaches to the top, it still doesn't have fuel in it, by the way. As it reaches to the top of that cylinder, that piston moves to the top of that cylinder, a high pressure injector squirts fuel into the cylinder right before it gets to the top, when it's at full compression. And that causes the explosion when that fuel is compressed so tight with 350 psi or more. That causes an explosion that forces that piston just right down. And there's different types of injections in diesels. In this diagram, this would be an example of direct injection, because it squirts the fuel right directly into the cylinder. There's another less common one nowadays called indirect injection. That's where it sort of has a normal cylinder, then it sort of has a little area off to the side or above or whatnot that it sort of starts the explosion in, and then it moves into the thing. That's called indirect injection. It's still technically in the cylinder, but it's sort of off to the side. That's sort of your two main designs of injection there. But there are gas engines that use injection now. A lot of gas engines use direct injection now, actually, because they get better fuel economy. But the diesels are always going to be some sort of injection. There's not going to be a carbureted diesel and that kind of stuff. That's because it has to force it in there in such a high pressure environment, and then once it gets in there, it explodes and goes back down. And because of this high pressure, you'll get so much more torque out of this diesel versus the gas. There's so much more energy stored in that diesel fuel versus the gasoline, that you're going to get a lot more power out of a lot less fuel, I guess, or even an engine. In general, you're going to get more power with your diesel compared to a gas. And it's going to come back down after that explosion, and then open that valve up and release the exhaust. Very similar. And then keep in mind, both these engines are what we call a 4-cycle engine. The piston does 4 cycles of rotation. There are 2-cycle engines, gasoline and diesel. The gasoline 2-cycle engines are pretty common. The gasoline engines and the diesel 2-cycle engines are a little different. The gasoline ones, you're going to be mixing fuel and oil in the intake when it comes in, so it can get lubrication. While the diesel, I guess it'd be more proper to say 2-stroke or 2-cycle. They have blowers that force air into them, and they just sort of do 2 cycles instead of 4. They do a compression cycle and exhaust cycle, compression, exhaust, compression, exhaust. There's no pull down, essentially. But they're a little bit more dirtier and less clean than the ones nowadays. That's why they're not really used anymore. A big manufacturer of them were Detroit Diesel. Back in the day, they had the 6V and 8V engines. Those were all 2-cycle, and they were very popular, but they did not meet emissions at all. And they phased out in about 2002 is when they stopped using them that often. All right, so we'll move on from there. Okay, so we can finally get to talking about the actual emissions and emission controls devices. So the the easiest way to understand this, the progress or timeline here, well, I guess the easiest way to understand the progress of what we've done to overcome our emissions and stuff is to look at a timeline. And there's some very important year dates that should be pointed out. First of all, we have what is called the tier. The tier is sort of a EPA government mandated level of emissions that a diesel engine can put out, or actually any engine, because they sort of cover a broad basis. But the tier is the sort of a progress that should be made. I guess that's the easiest way to understand it. Like, the tier 1 is going to be the easiest. The next one, tier 2, is going to be harder, and it's going to just increasingly get harder to pass emissions with each tier. And these are EPA forced or government forced regulations. So that's something to keep in mind too. So the first one is the pre-2007 tiers. Now those aren't necessarily weren't necessarily as challenging as the ones after, but I know the EGR specifically causes issues later in life. But the tier 1, tier 2 weren't necessarily a very hard tier to pass for these emission manufacturers, and weren't as troublesome as the future tiers that we'd have to come across. Now, pretty much everything before 2007, the year 2007, didn't have much emission control devices or anything in that matter to prevent any type of either soot or NOx or any other greenhouse gases or any type of exhaust gases that could potentially cause harm to humans. There was nothing preventing them from coming out pre-2007. That's tier 1, tier 2. Okay, and then the next tier would be post-2007. So about halfway through the year 2007 is when we began seeing vehicles with the tier 3 controls onto them. And that includes the diesel particulate filter, and usually with the diesel particulate filter, the diesel oxidation catalyst came along with it. And of course, we're going to go into all these here shortly, but I'm just giving you a timeline for right now. And finally, tier 4 is the final tier for right now. That was imposed in 2011, and that's the most recent tier that we're with. And if we're keeping up with the Volkswagen Scandal, that's the most important one right now. And in 2011 came your selective catalytic reduction control devices. So first you start out with your EGR and your different type of injection methods. We sort of went over those already, but just those at this point, those aren't necessarily important as the other ones. 2007, you have your diesel particulate filter and diesel oxidation catalyst. And 2011, we have the selective catalytic reduction. That's tier 4. So we'll move on with those here. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, the pre-2007 era tiers were a little less invasive than they are now, but there was some issues early on, and some manufacturers had a little difficulty getting reliability out of these. But most of these have since been fixed and do not cause the issues they used to. The first one being an EGR, or exhaust gas recirculation. Gas engines and diesel engines both have these. The majority of them do. Pretty much what they do is it runs a normal cycle of up, down, up, down, up, down through the piston. And what the EGR does is it grabs a little bit of the exhaust coming out, and this one runs it through a cooler. So it cools the hot gases coming out of the exhaust back down to a lesser temperature than they would be coming out of the crank case. And they go through a cooler, and then they flow right back into the intake to be reburned again. And so what this accomplishes is this was used to reduce the number of
NOx gases that were emitted. At that time, the regulations were much lower than they are now, so they didn't have to be as invasive. The EGR did pose problems, like I said. Because there's soot coming through, soot was pushed back into the EGR and through the intake and all that stuff, and the soot clogged up the EGR control valve and whatnot. But all in all, the EGR was an okay device for what it was meant to do. There wasn't too many problems, and they are still used today for the majority of engines, including a gas or a diesel engine. Both have EGRs, generally speaking, if we're talking about vehicle engines and commercial use engines, that kind of thing, not like lawnmowers and that kind of stuff. The other thing is the indirect versus direct injection. Now, I already sort of went over this already. The direct injection is where it shoots fuel right into the cylinder, or the combustion chamber, if you will. And indirect injection, it still shoots it into the chamber, but it's sort of off to the side a little bit. The cylinder sort of has a attachment to it that it shoots it in. But direct injection proved to be a little bit more, produce more power and more controllable, if you will. And there's some other techniques that we use with injection, high pressure fuel common rail type stuff, different injection injectors, that kind of stuff, to try to sort of fine tune the power coming out of a diesel engine. That's pretty much all you need to know from Tier 1, Tier 2. Less invasive than the next tiers, and generally the pre-2007 engines proved to be much more reliable, just because you could have a mechanical engine. Not saying that they were all mechanical before 2007. Mechanical engines from the 90s proved to be really reliable, because there is no electronics in them. There is no emission controls in them. Nothing trying to keep it within a certain range of operating pollutants coming out of it. But generally, the pre-2000 engines were much more reliable than their later counterparts. Alright, YouTube, so as you can see, I have a little diagram here. I figured the best way to show you guys would be to show you guys a diagram of exactly what's going on. Now, right now, I have the post-2007 emissions set up here, and that's in between the 2007 and in 2007 and 2010, 2011. There's sort of a wish-wash there of some of them were, some of them weren't. But right now we're going to focus on the post-2007. So to help you understand my diagram, I'll point some of the things out here. This huge blue thing right here, that's your engine. This is just a common 6-cylinder diesel here. It's very common in small trucks, large trucks. Usually the 6 cylinders, a 6-cylinder is a normal format, inline 6. A V8 diesel is pretty common, and a inline 4 is pretty common setup. But beyond that, everything else is sort of out there. But I use the most common setup of a inline 6. Right here, you have your air in. This is your air intake coming in. These would be the turbos. Air coming in to be burned. And then this is the exhaust side turbo. And this will be your exhaust pipe pretty much underneath your car or truck or bus or boat or whatever it will be. And this is your DPF or DOC emissions unit. Sometimes they're together and sometimes they're not. If you remember, this is your diesel oxidation catalyst, and this is your diesel particulate filter. So I'm going to sort of add in some little pieces here that'll sort of help it make more sense. The green is going to be your nitrous, sort of your NOx emissions, okay? And the black is going to be your particulate matter, both of which are produced by a diesel engine. Now, the particulate matter is produced when you don't have enough oxygen to combust all of the fuel. And that's pretty common when you have turbo lag and or your fuel mixture is too rich. You can force that to happen with certain tunings and whatnot, but a lot of times it happens when it's under a heavy load and the engine is still spooling up, especially the turbos. The turbo lag, like if the turbos are forcing air into the engine, but it can't get enough at that given time, you'll have a little bit more fuel than air than the ratio is supposed to call for. So you'll get a little bit of black soot or black carbon matter that's sort of burnt fuel kind of in a way, that if that makes sense. And that's what the DPF is meant to catch. And the DPF is sort of like a filter. It's got like a honeycomb look inside, and it's really ceramic. And the materials stick to it like a sponge when it goes through. So pretty much what you got here is these dots will represent little particulate matter coming out. And before 2007, this would just go straight right out, outside of the exhaust pipe, and plus whatever doesn't get go in the EGR. So you have all this matter coming in. The DOC doesn't do anything to the particulate matter, but the DPF catches all of it like a sponge. And of course, it's almost impossible to catch it all. So you do get a few particulate matter after the engine there. So the green, like I said, is going to represent sort of the NOx gases that the engine emits. Now this is emitted by most combustion engines. Gasoline emits it too. They don't emit as much as a diesel does, but they do emit it. But since this is there's nothing to capture it, it just goes straight through and down the exhaust pipe like such. Now you don't see it, it's an invisible gas. Day-to-day functions, everything before 2007 just blew it right out of the pipe. And yeah, so that's sort of what happens. The DPF captures a pretty good amount of it. So now you're probably asking what happens when the DPF gets filled up? What happens when all that soot clogs all those little honeycomb holes within that filter up? Well, what happens is there's sensors on either side of this that can detect the pressure differences between it, and because all the soot going through this, it gets clogged up and blocks pressure, and you have a much larger back pressure pushing against this engine. So there's a sensor that detects that, and there's some other sensors that do different things, but that's one of the common ones. And so once it gets full, it tells the computer up in the vehicle, well, your DPF is full, you need to clean it out. And so what it does is it goes in what's called regeneration mode. Now, there's sort of active regeneration and there's stationary regeneration, and those sort of been worked out depending on the years. It's more, one's more stronger than the other. That's it just depends on the time span and the year when it does. But when it calls for a regeneration, what it does is there's a few different ways for a regeneration. Some of them sort of squirt fuel directly in, but a lot of them keep the exhaust valve open on the 6th cylinder here and let fuel go in and burn, and it heats up pretty much all this pipe and heats up this DPF and DOC assembly very hot, and we're talking thousands of degrees here. Well, actually, I take that back, not thousands, but it's probably pretty close to 1,000, probably above 1,000, and it burns all this soot off into just kind of like a powdery soot, maybe like ashes, kind of like in your fireplace, and it burns all that out and just blows it down into the tailpipe. Now, sometimes this is noticeable, sometimes this isn't, but that heat, that such tremendous heat, heats it right out of the DPF, and it pretty much cleans it over again. It gets it over. And the stationary one is sort of when the vehicle's parked, it kicks up to a really high idle, like like 1500 RPMs or something like that. That's high for a diesel, keep in mind. But it kicks up to a higher idle, maybe between 1000 and 2000, somewhere around there. And it gets real hot and it'll sit there for a while, like a long time if it's sitting there in a stationary regen. Maybe 10, 15 minutes of it revving the engine real high, they heat up this assembly to burn it off. Now that's stationary. Now active regeneration works in a similar way, but it's more able to adjust to driving conditions. It'll adjust, it'll engage it while you're driving, so it's hardly noticeable. But it does decrease gas mileage ever so much, but it does help clean that out. Now, DPFs don't last forever. They do, some of the newer model ones have a pretty good lifespan, it seems, but some of the older, like 2007 to 2009 model years, not for a specific vehicle, but vehicles in general were generally plagued with issues in that time span. The DPFs causing issues just because it was a test bed. But these do eventually fail, and when they fail, it's very expensive. We're talking hundreds of dollars for a new DPF unit. You can get them cleaned, but they never work as they originally do. And I know a lot of people nowadays, when their DPF goes bad, especially in small pickup trucks, they delete the whole system. They'll just completely get rid of the whole DPF system, and just straight pipe it like as if it was, made before 2007. If it was an engine made before 2007, just have a straight pipe right out, maybe a muffler on it or something. Nothing more than that. And a lot of people do that nowadays, so they don't have to deal with the constant regeneration hassles or the common clogging up of this power loss. To be able to get to meet those emissions for that year with this system, a lot of the engines had to be derated down to a lower horsepower, so a less richer fuel mixture to be able to pass these emissions of this particulate filter. So and the other gases, some in the DOC. So you had a slight decrease in horsepower, and the heat from that regeneration on these engines significantly impacts the total wear of the engine, and I would say greatly reduces the lifespan of the engine just because of the heating cycles going up and down, going through regeneration every now and then. But yeah, that's sort of a rundown. And a lot of the vehicles, they'll have a switch or a button. You can force it in the regen. You just click it, and as long as it meets certain conditions and criteria, go through that regen and burn it off, so you don't have to do it at an inconvenient time. But a lot of those 2007 to 2009 vehicles I was talking about, where they're like the early test bed, didn't have one of those buttons. So if it didn't find a proper time to regen this, it'll derate itself, and eventually it'll just completely shut down. No matter what you're doing, it'll throw you a warning code and it'll shut completely down, whether you're driving or not. And it'll force you to either call a wrecker or a tow company or whatnot, and get it force regen, like stationary. You need a proper electronic tool to plug in there and fix it. It's it goes to the OBD2 port, and they can force a regen. But the newer ones have a button that'll allow you to activate the regens, and the newer ones are a lot better about active regen, where they do it themselves, and you don't really have to watch it and make sure it's doing what it's supposed to do. But that's pretty much a rundown for the 2007 to 2010, 2011 emissions. The next tier, this being tier 3, is a lot more complicated, or it adds another system to this. And keep in mind that the pre-2000 emissions are used in combination with this system. So you have your EGR that brings some of this exhaust gas and puts it right back into the engine, and that's used in combination with that. And you got your direct injection, which is pretty standard nowadays, and other direct injection techniques that clean it up. But I'll get set up here to show you the post 2010, 2011 Tier 4 emission setup, and I'll get right back to you. Alright, you guys, we're back here again with the same engine. If you remember, we had the same engine before, the 6-cylinder inline. And we got our 2007 emissions right here, this Tier 3 stuff, the DPF and the DOC, the stuff that captures the soot and like the diesel smoke, the smoke everybody complains about. And that was where 2007 stopped. Now we're going to hit the 2011 or 2010 emissions, that sort of the most recent emissions that we've come across. Now, the 2007 emissions is pretty much what everybody, any like diesel enthusiast or somebody that owns a diesel complains about. The majority of the people highly despise the DPF just because of the reliability issues. The SCR, not so much. Besides the hassle of adding the diesel exhaust fluid, the SCR system's pretty non-invasive. But that's where it starts here. So after the DPF, remember the 2007 one cut off right there and just went straight out of the DPF. But now we have the SCR system starting in 2010 or 2011, depending on the vehicle. The SCR system's designed to reduce the NOx gases that the diesel engine produces. So you have like nitrogen oxide and nitrogen dioxide coming in out of the DPF and out of the engine into this SCR system. And these gases are a lot more dangerous than some, say, like carbon dioxide or some of the other greenhouse gases that we deal with on a normal basis. So to reduce that, we add a chemical called urea, which urea is a chemical that reduces this into something else. It's known as diesel exhaust fluid. So like a 32.5, somewhere around there, percent of urea, and then the rest of it is just water. But this is filled like, say, a washer fluid would be. You buy it at a gas station. A lot of times, a lot of the larger gas stations have diesel exhaust fluid in bulk. Just like, you know, you pull the nozzle out to get diesel, you'll pull the nozzle out to get diesel exhaust fluid. And the tank is generally right next to the diesel tank. But you fill that up, it's pretty inexpensive. It's about $2 a gallon, $2.50 a gallon, somewhere around there. And it lasts a very long time. We're talking thousands of miles here is how long one tank lasts. Each manufacturer sort of aims for a certain specification of how long they want it to last. But this fluid lasts a good long time. A few problems with it is it's got a pretty low, high freezing point, so it can freeze on you. They've sort of dealt with that by putting heaters within the tanks to keep it warm, or at least a temperature where it won't freeze. But it's injected into the after the DPF as the exhaust gases work its way into the SCR system. The selective catalyst reduction, is done within its own, I don't want to say box, but unit on the exhaust pipe. And that's where the whole chemical conversion happens. It sort of reduces with the NO and NO2 that we learned about earlier, and it forms other gases that are have been said to be less toxic to the environment, I guess, or safer for the environment, and or the environments that it'll be around. Pretty much it goes through all its chemical changes within the SCR, and then it goes out the exhaust pipe. And the final products from this are carbon dioxide, water, and nitrogen. And it's N2 because nitrogen is a diatomic element. So, and that's all that comes out of the exhaust pipe. And now if you look at that compared to what originally came out, all this nitrous gases and particulate matter, That is a very, very clean output. And even compared to a gasoline engine, what comes out of this exhaust is extremely clean. And that's good for situations like, like a bus terminal where you have multiple large diesel vehicles running at once, and a whole bunch of people around it. That way you don't have all that whatever the original stuff that's coming out of the engine going into people's lungs or whatnot. Carbon dioxide is a common greenhouse gas, but it doesn't necessarily pose a serious risk at the moment. Trees use it and that kind of stuff. Water, just the normal water you drink, H2O, and nitrogen gas, which is an abundant gas in the atmosphere. So all those are greatly reduced into something that's much better for the environment through this SCR system. And it's not too complicated of a system when you add it all together. And this is pretty much where we are today. And the SCR system is what the Volkswagen Scandal is about. And pretty much to do a rough visual of what the Volkswagen system or Volkswagen Scandal did is that this diesel exhaust fluid is controlled by a computer. It's injected through a nozzle, and then that nozzle is controlled by the car's computer. What Volkswagen did was when the car's steering wheel isn't moved, so like when it's on a dyno or something along that lines, it allows the emissions to work. So this whole system would be working as it should. The particulate matter is getting caught, the diesel exhaust fluids being injected and converting those dangerous NOx gases, which are these ones, into the more common, safer greenhouse gases. And what Volkswagen did is when it was outside that test mode, like not on a dyno and not in test conditions, it stopped the use of this DEF fluid. So all this nitrous oxide gases would continue to flow right out of this SCR system. It go right out here and then go out like such. And so these gases, the nitrous oxide, nitrous dioxide, I shouldn't be saying nitrogen oxide and nitrogen dioxide gases would just flow right through. And so they did not meet emissions. And then the EPA requires this emission pass in 2010. So it was able to pass emissions when it was on the dyno because the DEF fluid was injected. But as soon as it was taken out of the emission testing standards, the software within the car's computer was able to sense that, and it turned off the flow of diesel exhaust fluid. So that kept it from converting all these dangerous gases, or what we consider dangerous today, and it just let them flow right out. Now the interesting thing here is that before 2007, all this stuff didn't exist and it just flowed right out. So this whole recent debate here is kind of a a time thing. That's a whole reason why I did the timeline. So if Volkswagen did that, this wouldn't have mattered to Volkswagen, say 2006. It had no purpose. In 2006, it would have been just straight out. All that gases would just come straight out the pipe and the back of the vehicle or whatnot. All this stuff didn't exist. So in a short, few years span from 2007 till now, all this stuff has been created and now forces it to meet emissions. So depending on where you look at it, it's sort of a goofy situation that they're going through. And it's not that hard of a fix from a software standpoint, but when you look at the sacrifices it has to take from elsewhere to be able to meet emissions, that's where it gets tricky. Because when you run an engine like this, you have to balance, power, reliability, and economy, fuel economy. And when you disable the software, not give it fluid, has full power, good fuel economy, all that stuff, all the stuff that people want, but it doesn't meet emissions. But when you enable that emissions, you greatly reduce the fuel economy. You kill the power because of so much more, fuel going through and burning it up and that kind of stuff. Well, I take that back. The power of the SCR isn't too bad. The power reduction of the SCR, the DPF power reduction was pretty bad, but the SCR didn't really affect power too much. But there are they richened that mixture when they were, not allowing the DEF to go through. So the fuel mixture was richer. Thus, the engine burned a little bit more dirtier than it would have if the software was telling it to, meet these emission regulations. So that's sort of where the problem comes about. So how do you fix that? Is another question. Well, you fix the software in it. That's the easiest thing to do. But that comes at the expense of the overall driving experience of the vehicle. And if you look around, a lot of the diesel vehicles today, especially post 2010, 2011 vehicles, are fairly reliable compared to some of the older ones. All these systems works in unison, and it's the only time you ever really notice it is when you have to put the exhaust fluid in it, or the DPF causes problems, which today the modern DPFs are a lot better than the older DPFs. So hopefully that made sense. It's a complicated system at first if you take it all at once, but if you divide it up, into the sections, it sort of makes sense. And a gas engine really doesn't have any of these emission stuff on them. It just has a catalytic converter, which is similar to a DOC. So yeah, that's pretty much it, and we'll get back to the PowerPoint here shortly.
Okay, so knowing what you know now of what I just showed you on the SCR systems and DPF systems, the Volkswagen Scandal pretty much only revolves around the SCR system. It'd be very hard to stop a DPF from working since it sort of is it's not controlled by much besides getting a regeneration. It still traps it even as long as it flows through. So it completely revolves around the SCR system. And like I said earlier, the Scandal is about a software program they programmed into the car about keeping if you kept the steering wheel perfectly straight as if it was on a dyno, it would engage the emission software that was programmed in it to say, hey, we need to cut the SCR on full to ensure we pass the emissions test. That's pretty much what the Scandal is about. And as soon as they took it off that dyno or testing device they use, it's most likely a dyno. That's the only way the wheels could be perfectly straight like that. It goes back to its normal operating software that is also programmed to it. So when it goes back, it disables that SCR from working by preventing the diesel exhaust fluid from flowing in. So that's the best summary of it. I listed a few of the vehicles that were affected by the recall. Obviously, there's more, and some of the Audi's other, some of Volkswagen's other companies that use the engine probably are affected. Because Volkswagen is Audi. If you have an Audi, it might be involved in the Scandal. So we'll sort of discuss what we need to do here next. Okay, so another question you might be asking is, have we seen this type of scandal or issue before? And the answer to that is yes. And there's a pretty big notable one I'd like to mention. That is Navistar. Navistar International, to be technical. Navistar is a truck company, a medium and heavy duty truck manufacturer for the commercial market. They also make school buses and like refuge trucks and that kind of stuff. They make the chassis for it. They don't necessarily make the trucks. but they make their own engines, and their engines have been around for a while, and they met the 2007 emissions just fine. But instead of trying to conform with the SCR systems for 2010, because they had the option, you could go with the SCR unless you might have had another way that you could possibly pass emissions, and they felt like they had another method that they could use to pass the 2010 emissions without having to use SCR. And for the for the customer, that sounds really good, because then you wouldn't have to buy the diesel exhaust fluid, and you wouldn't have another system to deal with. And so they did a few different things to their engines to try to meet the 2010 emissions, and they ended up failing miserably because they couldn't pass them, and their engines became very unreliable. They had they tried to meet the 2010 emissions with a certain EGR type setup, a different setup than most of the other companies had, and they had that system, and they tried to get through with that. And at first, everything looked well, but after a while, it seems as though the system did not work as it was supposed to. And they were sued by the EPA for that, and I think a lot of it is still ongoing. But Navistar was the one that was at fault for that, and they have emissions credits and that kind of stuff they were trying to spend, I believe, too. But that's just one example. There are many more other examples of this, mostly a lot smaller examples, but just know that a lot of engine manufacturers went out of business or got off the highway industry market just because of these emission standards, and the fact that once you put all this stuff, it would become unreliable, or it would greatly decrease the durability of the engine and all that stuff. They just decided to just completely get out of the market and switch to either off highway or just stop overall. So what will happen to your TDI vehicle, you may ask? Well, eventually you'll receive a recall notice from Volkswagen saying that you'll need to bring into the Volkswagen dealership. But at the moment, I don't believe Volkswagen has a solution for this just yet. The easy solution would be to go in and program everybody's software to re-engage the emission software, and probably lessen the fuel mixture that the engine's running at. But that causes a lot of reliability and power and fuel economy issues that have yet to be sorted out. So they have to go through a testing phase of reverting back to the emission compliant software that they were originally supposed to run full time. So that they have to work those issues out first and see if that they'll be able to create a reliable, powerful, fuel efficient product by engaging the software back. So that's the first thing they have to do. So you have a little time before you get a recall, and they have to do the recall, but that doesn't mean you have to do the recall. So I'll move on with that here. Okay, so this part's going to be sort of my final thoughts, and probably the most important for somebody that owns a TDI and is considering going for the recall. And this is probably the questions I'm going to throw out at you. So knowing that this system was only implemented in 2010, the system is not that old. So if you're more, it really depends on what you're concerned about with this recall. If you're concerned about the emissions of your car, are you concerned about losing fuel economy? If you're concerned about losing the good driving dynamics that diesels have, and all that stuff, you have to really sit down and think of what you want. If it's really, compared to what they used to be, these diesels are very clean with or without the SCR system. The filter is still working, so you're not going to have soot flying around or anything. But just 3 years before, this system wouldn't have mattered. There's Jettas and Passats out there that aren't required to meet any testing, and so you got to think to yourself, the only person that's making you do this is the EPA. Volkswagen sure doesn't want to have to do it to you. The EPA is forcing you, and the EPA is not going to come around to everybody's Jetta and Passat and test to see if it works. Now, if you have emission testing in in your state or province or country, that might pose an issue. But for the majority of the time, those emission testings are so high strung. I mean, you have to be like blowing black coal constantly to fail those emission testings, and those cars will not do that. And for the past few years, I mean, you probably pass your emission tests multiple times if you have to, because of they put it on a dyno and test it. But even then, it's still going to pass it with that, because you're still going to have that software. If you choose not to go to the recall, you're still going to have the software that enables to pass it. And the next thing I'd like to say, are these engines any cleaner than the gasoline engines of today? And the answer to that is yes and no. If the particulate matter, yes, it's much cleaner. The NOx gases, that's another topic for debate. Without the SCR system, it is going to put out a little bit more NOx gases, but are you ever going to notice that in your life? Absolutely not. If you drive one of these daily, you're never going to notice the NOx gases at all. It's not going to affect you one bit. Now, if you do choose to get this recall, there should be an expectation to see, you're going to see a downgrade in performance, whether horsepower, torque, that kind of stuff, and your fuel economy is going to drop. And this is mainly because of they have to retune the engine to ensure that the SCR can fully handle all the emissions that are coming through. You lighten up the fuel that's going to the engine, it's going to run a little bit leaner, thus creating a little bit less of the gases and whatnot that would be sorted through by the SCR. And this is where pretty much it creates all the problems that you might encounter with running a leaner engine is going to get you less power in a diesel, generally speaking. And that downgrade in performance, you might not like that. It might make your engine super, might drop your power greatly. And there's no telling at this point, but and your fuel economy is most likely to go down as well because of the the less power you're going to get out of the engine. So it's going to have to work a little bit harder. Another thing is this is mainly towards the whole idea itself. Recalling 11 million vehicles or however many they're doing at this point, that's going to hit the economy pretty hard. Volkswagen has some major factories in the United States, and they're sort of at a halt right now just because of this. And if the EPA is sort of stopping all this, and so is Volkswagen. Volkswagen, they're sort of put in a sticky situation where they have to. But the economy is sort of at halt for Volkswagen. And, they're going to have to put a lot of their money into this. Now, the wise thing, if of course I'm not the EPA, but the wise thing to do, if I was the EPA, would be to sort of annex these vehicles in. There's 11 million vehicles, that's going to take forever to try to recall. And not everybody's going to choose to get their recall done, because why would you? Why would you want to lose all your good performance, your fuel economy, the main reason you bought the TDI in the first place? Why would you want to lose all those benefits that you bought the car for? And so, trying to force all these recalls on people, that's going to be some pretty seriously hard to do. Because you're pretty much asking people, hey, can I please drop your fuel economy and your power of your engine and all the benefits of your TDI, so the EPA you can pass what the EPA requires, even though you'll never be required to pass it. You'll never be in a situation where somebody's testing your vehicle unless you got to go through emission testing. But even then, you still will most likely pass it because of the software. And there should be a little side note here about California. California is an exception to this. Now, if I was in California with one of these TDIs, I would most likely get the recall fixed, just because California is extremely strict on such topics, and they have their own, pretty much they have their own state EPA, and they're very air quality conscious there. And they will probably test your vehicle in different ways. And the final thought here is, the reliability aspect. You're going to have to start buying diesel exhaust fluid if you go through this. You're going to start putting more wear and tear on your exhaust system, and your engine, running at a leaner thing. So think about that when you're considering to go get this recall. Now, if I had a TDI in this situation, I would not immediately go get the recall. And I say this because, of course, like I said, there's going to be a test period. If they do, if they do change the software stuff, which they most likely will, if they do change it and it does work all out for the good, there's no crazy drop in performance or crazy drop in fuel economy, and that I would definitely go get it. But at the beginning, I would definitely not go get it. Why fix something that's not broken? And in terms of the everyday consumer, this vehicle is not broken at all. This vehicle has no problem being on the road, just like the millions of other non-compliant vehicles that were made before 2010 and 2007 that are on the road today. There's no difference. But yeah, that's where I'd like to end this topic and debate, or whatever you want to consider it. I hope you guys learned something from this. I enjoyed showing it to you, and let me know if it helps you out, if you're coming here to see if this is what I should do or whatnot. But thanks for watching. Comment, rate, subscribe. I make all kinds of videos here on YouTube, but thanks for watching.